Hey there guys, Synthetic Programming here with another video for you guys today. And today we are going to go over lesson 4 of our Learn Python from Beginner to Expert tutorial. We're going to be writing our first functions. And now I have 3 functions laid out here that we're going to write today. The first thing we're going to do is write a function that takes 2 numbers and simply adds them together. Then we're going to write a function that finds if x is divisible by y. And then we're going to write a function that calculates the hypotenuse of a right triangle. So we're going to do, first we're going to write the actual code of the functions, and then down here I'll show you how we can actually call those functions and make them print out values. And I'm also going to go over writing docstrings today. Writing docstrings is good just to keep track of your own code, what your functions are meant to do, and can also help other people read your code. So we're going to do that for the first one, and then we'll do them for the other 2 as well. So now we're going to write the function that takes 2 numbers and adds them together. So the first thing we do is we define a new function with def for define. We'll call it add, so you can call it whatever you want. Put 2 parentheses and a colon, and then in here we put all the parameters that our function takes. And parameters are just like the variables that you pass through your function. So we're going to put x and y in there. So the next thing we do is we make a multi-line comment. You can do that with 2 sets of 3 quotes like this. And in here we're going to write just a little description of what our function does. And so we can say takes x like this and adds it to y like this. Then we go down 2 lines or so, and we can actually tell whoever's using the function and tell ourselves what kinds of values we'll be passing through. So for example, do an @ symbol, type x, and we'll say x is either going to be an integer, and then you can use this line for or a float, because we want it to be a number, right? So x is either going to be an integer or x will be a float. And then we're going to do the same thing. Type y is going to be the same thing, an int or a float. So now when someone comes and reads this code, actually hold on, sorry, one more thing. We also want something called rtype, which just tells us what the function is going to return in the end. So what the function is going to give us, and that's also going to be an int or a float, like this. Oop. Cool. Okay, so now when someone comes and looks at your actual code, they'll say, okay, this function takes x and adds it to y, and x is either going to be an integer or a float, y is also either an integer or a float, and it's going to return either an integer or a float. That helps people when they read your code and use your function. So now this is what we're going to do. We are going to type, because this one is so easy, we're going to return, this is what our function outputs, and we're going to return x plus y, like this. And we can take off these extra parentheses, sorry. There we go. So what this function does is we called our function adds x and y. It just returns x plus y. Simple enough. And I'll show you guys how to use that in a minute. So now we're going to write the function that finds if x is divisible by y. This one's going to be a little more complicated, and the parts in this function we're going to go over in more detail in another video when we talk about conditional statements, but I'm just going to write it so you guys can see what a function like this kind of entails. So we want this function to return true or false. If x is divisible by y, then we'll return true, and if it's not, we'll return false. So we define a new function called isDivisible. And in here we want to see if x is divisible by y. In our docstring we'll say, get rid of all this automatically inputted stuff, and we can say, okay, finds if x is divisible by y, like this. So we're going to do the same thing we did above, where we say the type of x is an int or a float. The type of y is an int or a float. And the R type, the thing that we return in the end, is going to be a Boolean. Because remember, Boolean, like we talked about in the data types video, is just true or false. So that's what we're going to return. So in this code is actually simpler than you might think. We're going to use conditionals where we say if y, or sorry, we want to see if x is divisible by y. So if x modulus y is equal to 0, return true, else return false. And so I know this stuff looks a little bit confusing, and we're going to go over it, like I said, in more detail in another video, but what this statement is doing is pretty much just a logical test. It says if the remainder when you divide x by y is 0, then return true because x is then divisible by y, and otherwise just return false. Okay, we're going to move on to our third function now. In our third function, we're going to write a function that calculates the hypotenuse of a right triangle from its other sides. And if you guys know this from school, you probably should. It's called the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So what we're going to do is we're going to say diff hypot for hypotenuse. And here we need two things. We need the length of side A and the length of side B. Okay? So in our docstring, we're going to write find the length of the hypotenuse. And then after this, we'll do type of A is going to be an int or a float. The type of B is going to be an int or a float. And the type, and the type that we're returning, the R type, is going to be an int or a float. And now we can get to writing this function. So in this function, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with, so we know that the function we're looking for is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We have a and we have b. So the first thing we do is let's make a variable called c squared. And in c squared, we're going to have, we have a squared, so a raised to the 2, plus b squared. And we can actually take these and put them in their own parentheses just so we make sure that everything is correctly multiplied. So, okay, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, we have to find the square root of c squared. And the way we can do that is we can either import a library that does it called math, but we're not going to move on to import statements yet. What I'm going to do instead is we're going to do return c squared raised to the 1 divided by 2. This is c squared raised to the 1/2, which is the same thing as the square root. Okay, so this returns the square root of c squared, which is just c. So this is returning c. So now we have our three functions that we've written. They look very nice, and we're going to learn how to use them down here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to print. So printing just prints whatever's in here, the string that's in here. So I can type hello there, and if I run this, you'll see that it prints hello there. And I can change this to, and if I run this again, it says hello there you guys. There we go. So anything I put in here will print. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to print adds, the function we wrote, and then instead of x and y, we put in the numbers we want to add. Let's try 5 and 8. We'll run that, and it says 13. Perfect. We can also do 4.9 and 8.3. Run that, we get 13.20000, big float, but that's pretty much what we want adds to do. Let's test our other one. We have is divisible, so we can test and see if is divisible works. So is divisible, let's see if 10 is divisible by 5. We know that it is, so let's see. And it says true, 10 is divisible by 5. But is 10 divisible by 3? No, it's not, and so it says false. So our is divisible function is working correctly. And then the last thing we can test is hypot. So we'll do hypot of a triangle with length sides 4 and 5. And we can see that the hypotenuse of that triangle is 6.4. So we have proof now that our functions work pretty well to what we want them to do. And now I'm going to show you just one last thing, which is how you can set function values equal to variables. So because these functions return something, they're actually giving a value back to us. And what we can do with that is we can put it in a variable. So we can say answer equals is divisible 36 and 6. We know this is going to be true, so now we say print answer, and if I run this, you'll see it says true because it stores the answer from this function in here, and then we print that. So think of functions, calling functions like this, as us asking a question. And then when you set a variable equal to a function, you're pretty much just storing the answer to that question in that variable. So thank you guys so much for watching. That was our tutorial on doing some basic functions. In the next tutorial, we're going to talk about conditional statements, like we used in the is divisible function here, and how we can use them for logical reasons. So we can make some really interesting decisions, and we can use these to make some far more advanced functions. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can click here to go straight to that other video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.